Welcome, welcome. We're going to start a little bit early today. We have a lot of people here. We have a lot of things to cover. First of all, I want to welcome all of you to attending our City Club Forum. City Club's mission is to bring together people to inform and inspire citizens on issues vital to the community of Missoula in public forums that encourage the discussion of ideas and the free exchange of thought. We're very happy that you're all here today. In my memory, I think this is the largest attendance we've ever had at City Club. So I want to thank each one of you. We want to first thank our sponsors. And it's only through their generous contributions that we are able to sponsor these programs. And so look on your tables, we have a list of the sponsors listed. You may want to thank those individuals if you know them. Second, we want to thank the many members of the City Club for your support. We welcome everyone to, anyone can come to City Club and to our forums regardless of whether you're a member or not. But we would encourage you to go to our City Club website and sign up as a member. You get a little bit of a break when you, for your lunches. You get, you're on our email list. It makes us easier to communicate with you. We want to also thank Missoula Community Access Television. If you miss a forum, if you want to go back and replay a forum, if you go to the MCAT site, you can replay any of the forums going back over the past several years. So, and again, we want to thank MCAT for your diligently being here for every forum that we've had. Next, I'd like to introduce some special guests we have today. You know, this facility is wonderful, the food is excellent, and there's a lot of things that go on behind the scenes to make all of this happen. And I would especially like to thank our guests today, the staff of the DoubleTree. Dan Monahan and your staff, would you please stand up, please? Thank you very much. I have been coming to the DoubleTree and interacting with them and working with them to host various events for the last 35 years. And I can truly say that the attendance, the assistance you've given us, the professionalism, the help, the advice has never been better. And thank you very much for helping us. Now what I'd like to, I do want to say this. Normally we end this at 1 o'clock, but because of the many people here today, and I know there's going to be a lot of questions, we are going to go probably past 1 o'clock for questions. And so if you do have to leave at 1, don't be afraid to stand up and step out. But we are going to try to get it over with by probably at least 1:15, 1:20. I'd like to introduce now Peggy Kaur, former member of the University of Montana and a City Club board member, and she is going to introduce our moderator today.
Welcome, and it is my great pleasure to introduce Sally Mock, who is the moderator for our debate this afternoon. Many of you either know Sally or you know her voice because she served for years on Montana Public Radio and was the news director for a number of years before retiring only several years ago. But let me tell you a little bit more, just a little bit more about Sally. She grew up in a small town in Kansas, and she is a Jayhawk. She graduated from the University of Kansas. From the University of Kansas, she had a double major in Western European history and German language and literature with a minor in English. She says her first job out of college was working at a mutual funds stock brokerage, the only job she ever truly hated. And then from there, it was on to Montana, where she became a wilderness ranger working on the Kootenai National Forest. In 1980, she joined Montana Public Radio here at the University of Montana and served, as I said, as news director for a number of years. You can still hear her on the radio, though she's retired. She does host a weekly political analysis program during the legislative session and during statewide campaign season. Please welcome Sally as our moderator.
Very pleased to be here because I think City Club is one of Missoula's finest institutions, and appreciate any opportunity to have civil discourse in this day and age. I'm going to give very brief introductions of our two candidates. I think most of you by now know who they are, and then we're going to get right to questions, none of which are about potholes. I'm just going to say that right. Lisa Triepke has lived in Missoula since 1991, has worked for several nonprofits, and been elected to serve on 2 school boards. She's currently Director of Marketing and Community Outreach at Cost Care, and she also previously ran for Missoula County Commissioner. John Engen is serving his 3rd term as Missoula Mayor, having previously served on the City Council. He's a former journalist and small business owner and a native Missoulian. And we get right to questions, and this is for both of them. Federal policies, everything from healthcare to the environment, have tremendous local impacts. In that context, who did you support in the last presidential election and why? And what do you think will guide and why? Ms. Triepke, if you want to start.
Sure, thank you, and thanks for having me today. The turnout of this crowd is amazing and indicative of the interest in this race. And I'm happy that the mayor's race is a nonpartisan race. The mayor's job is about all of the people of Missoula, not just the left, the right, the Democrats or the Republicans. And that question's been asked a lot. What I'm going to say is voting is a privacy right, and you can choose to vote who you want to. And I think the ugliness of the last presidential race was so indicative of how it divided the country, local, all the politics. And so I think that because the privacy of voting is kind of what makes everybody be able to be comfortable and vote the way they want, I am middle of the road, I'm fiscally responsible, and that's how I'd like to answer the question. I respect everybody's privacy in that way.
I voted for Hillary Clinton. Before that, I voted for Barack Obama, and before I voted for Democrats. I voted for Democrats all my life. Missoula is a very politically active community, and while these are nonpartisan races, the fact of the matter is that the party you identify with helps folks understand their values. And I'm pretty proud of those values, and I'm pretty proud of the values of the evening.
I want to ask a quick follow-up of both of you. Are there federal policies right now that you're most concerned about in terms of how they may impact the community of Missoula?
Sure. As you mentioned in my bio, I work for Cost Care, and I've worked there for 8 years right now. And we're privately owned by 2 providers that left community medical center because of red tape and fees, skyrocketing fees, et cetera. And our mission is to provide quality, affordable health care for everybody, specifically Western Montana. And we found a way to do it. And originally we didn't take insurance. People were able to walk in for $45 per visit and get seen for absolutely anything they needed. The Affordable Health Care Act came in and we had to change our policies. So I'm interested in constantly trying to be able to, with all the policies in place, still be able to help Missoulians find affordable health care. And Cost Care's been able to find a way to do it despite the mandates from the government. We're able to work out and think outside the box because we're privately owned, so we can come up with different solutions that are out there, and we're able to say yes when lots of times people are saying no.
Engen, do you want to respond?
So federal policy really trickles down or pours down on municipal governments depending on the issue and the day, and those policies today that give municipal leaders pause range from healthcare to transportation to serving folks who are on food assistance to taking care of folks with mental illness. The list goes on, and each of those policies will affect the way we are able to provide services at the City of Missoula for a long time. In particular, healthcare. Healthcare, while it does not appear to be something that directly affects municipal government, the fact of the matter is that the more people who are suffering, the more people who have to make difficult choices between food, shelter, medicine, and healthcare, the more that impacts our community in terms of what we need to do with first responders, how we address homelessness, and much, much more.
State policies also, of course, have local impacts, and the governor may call a special session to deal with the state's revenue problems. What would you like to see the governor and state lawmakers do regarding the state's fiscal problems? Should they cut more or raise taxes? If they decide to cut more, what do you see will be the direct or indirect local impact? Mayor Engen.
So I sit on the board of the Montana League of Cities and Towns, which is basically the trade organization for local governments around the state. And our board voted to send a letter to the governor last week. That letter will suggest to the governor that we need to look at some temporary revenue solutions rather than further cuts. The fact is that cuts, particularly in the mental health arena, will have a direct and challenging impact on local governments, and ultimately we end up paying one way or another. And I think it's soon that we figure out ways to address those revenue issues on a state level rather than pass those costs along to local governments and make us do all of the heavy lifting. We believe that there's lots of opportunity there. We believe that the state can turn this around. But currently the cuts that are on the table, particularly 10% across the board cuts, again, all of that trickles down to our community, and we all pay in one way or another.
So I read an article in the Missoulian today about a small child in Miles City who has made tremendous progress in some of their capabilities through the use of assistance with the state funds, and that those funds may now be cut. And I think that we need to be able to focus on some of the things like mental health and still provide some of those services and come together. But when I was thinking about it this morning, one of the things that I think could really be looked at, and I know this is a touchy subject and probably all of the conversations in this room and this forum are going to be touchy, but the state provides all of their employees an insurance plan where they get free health care and don't have to pony up at all, and they come through their, I think it's Care Here, Care Now. And I think that if we were to look at some of those things and still provide the state employees with the medical benefits, but at least have them have some skin in the game and be able to come up with some co-pays or additional funding on their own, I think there's a way that we can save an enormous amount of money and then feed that back to the local communities.
The next question will be for both of them, and we'll start with Ms. Triepke. What, if anything, do you think makes Missoula unique among Montana cities? And whatever that is it something you want to encourage or change?
So one of the reasons I'm running is because I'm passionate about Missoula, and I've lived here since 1991, like was mentioned earlier. And I think people live in Missoula for one of two reasons. It's their connection to the land and to the people. And anybody that loves to live here, I think for any of the reasons they say can be combined under those two reasons. I think we all love the outdoors, we love all the recreational opportunities that Missoula offers. The people here are genuine. Anytime, I'm sure all of you have similar situations, but anytime I have guests come in from out of town, they walk away saying how nice we are and how genuine, and people are out there to help and friendly, and that's not what you get nationwide. I grew up in Maryland, and I go back every year with my kids, and we're always glad to be there to see family and friends, but Missoula's home, and so again, it comes back to the connections we have, and I wouldn't change that at all.
Mary.
So for me, this place is about people, and I have had the privilege over the last dozen years and longer than that, before I was involved in public service, to see Missoulians come together relentlessly, generously to solve problems. And that coming together, that spirit of cooperation and collaboration has made great things happen in our community. Missoula's a better place than it was when I was a kid. When I was a kid, there were teepee burners and smoke in the air and filth in the river, and all of that has changed because people working together have made choices. They've been deliberate, they've been thoughtful, and they've been courageous, and that courage has resulted in a place where a lot of people want to live and make a life.
Even in that context of Missoula being such a great place to live, political divisions in this country have never been more severe or contentious, and that's true in Missoula too. What can and would you as mayor do to try to bridge those divisions? In other words, if you win, how are you going to comfort those who may be bitterly disappointed their candidate lost? Mary?
I've had some experience with people bitterly disappointed in my election. over time, but the fact of the matter is that I recognize I'm here to serve everyone, and while we don't necessarily agree, we have a great system for hearing from folks who may be in the minority on any given issue. And I have kept my door open and, to the degree possible, my ears open to hearing those alternative points of view. The best we can do is hear people out. The best we can do is ensure that we are not cynical, and the best we can do is have the ability to change our mind when folks offer good ideas. And I have had folks offer good ideas to me who may not have supported me in election, and I think that's the way it should be. Fundamentally, we work for lots of folks we hear from, and we work for folks from whom we will never hear. It is highly unlikely that if you are sleeping in a car, you're going to make an appointment with the mayor to talk about your circumstances, but I keep that soul in my mind every day when I come to work, as well as the person who is very, very cynical about government. We try to keep this place open and responsive and productive and effective.
Ms. Triepke?
Thanks. So when I decided to enter the race with the encouragement and support of community members throughout, we decided at the very first meeting the unanimous decision was we were going to take the high road and keep the race clean. And I think for the most part we've stuck to the issues. And I think what struck me so intensely is the divisiveness of this race. I think it means that people are interested in the future of Missoula, and the social media, I have to tell you, for people out there, you may or may not know this, I don't read the comments because to me, everybody has the opinions and they're blowing up. And Missoula is such we tout ourselves as being a tolerant community, and people will feed me some of the things that are being said out there. And the level of ugly and intolerance astounds me, because I think we're all here to make Missoula a better place and come together. And so whether it's John or I think we both have that goal. And I hope that after the race is over, that everybody can join together and know that it was an election and the people that turned out to vote made the decision. So I hope that people that are following me feel that way, and I hope that people that are following John feel the same way too.
Affordable housing is an issue in every city that is a popular place to live. Do you think local government can meaningfully influence the housing market, and how exactly? Ms. Triepke?
So I do think we can affect the affordable housing market. I want to back up. When I entered the race, I looked at, probably like many citizens do, looked at affordable housing as that just affecting low-income people, and that's not the case. It affects so many people in our community. It affects the elderly who are on fixed income. It affects the students coming out of college with high loans. It affects the renters whose rent is being raised by landlords who are passing off the increased property taxes to them. I think that there's two ways that we can affect it. One is trying to approach it through the budget so that we are not constantly raising property taxes, and then also to work within the community. I look at Bozeman, who has just initiated the Larkspur project, which is coming up with 132 units of affordable housing, which does go to the low income. We've produced 27 units, I think, in the last year. I think that we can work with Homeward, which is a local Missoula company or nonprofit organization, work with them and the people at the state and federal level to get a project in place like that. One of the high comments that I've heard on the campaign trail is that people are getting taxed out of their homes, and they've lived there for a long time. I think that we can work with elderly, maybe to come up with a program in place that could help cap their taxes if they've lived there for a certain number of years. There's just a lot of different options we can look at, and right now there's not really an end in sight for the taxes to continue raising. I look at mine have gone up 27% in the last 4 years, and if you do the math and the calculations on it, over 20 years, based on my taxes right now, I would be paying $80,000 in property taxes, and that's through the roof, and that's on top of your mortgage and interest, et cetera.
So the city of Missoula can and does work to change the housing market and create opportunities, and we've done that through a variety of means, including partnerships with organizations including Homeward and Missoula Housing Authority, as well as private sector developers who are interested in low-income housing and moderate income housing. And we've done unit after unit, but we haven't done enough. And fundamentally, we just need to do more, which is why we tipped up a housing office about 1.5 years ago, our first ever effort to be more intentional about creating housing opportunities for all Missoulians from stem to stern. That office is working in cooperation with the Missoula Organization of Realtors on a housing study that we hope will help us understand, not just anecdotally, but factually, what the market needs, what the opportunities are, and how we can begin to close some gaps. And there are a number of tools that we have in place today, and a number of tools that we can apply, not only in terms of policy, but in terms of investment. Our redevelopment agency, our community development block grant programs through the federal government, as well as our home funds through the Department of Housing and Urban Development, can all be applied intentionally, logically, and cooperatively to really move the needle. And our hope is that through policy and direct investment, we can do that and build more than 30 units at a time. We can build hundreds of units at a time based on community need.
What is your criteria for when you think an issue should be put to the voters versus decided by the city's elected representatives, meaning the council and Mayor Engen?
The balance is pretty simple for me. That is, there are issues that are of critical importance to the community, and we were elected to do a job. We were elected to guide policy and make decisions and lead. And when those issues are self-evident to me, in the case of, for example, the acquisition of our water system, a fundamental community asset, the stuff of life, there wasn't much question to me whether or not we needed to take that to voters to consider, particularly given the fact that we knew that the system could pay for itself, that it wouldn't be a burden on taxpayers, nor would it be a burden on ratepayers. There are issues that I don't necessarily feel strongly enough about in my gut, and there are issues that have expenses that may or may not appeal to the larger community, and I think in those cases, taking those issues, those values questions to voters is appropriate. I think taking a many $million-dollar parks and trails bond to voters is entirely appropriate. I think taking a revenue bond that rebuilds schools is entirely appropriate. But there are lots of decisions that you all hire us to make through another referendum process, and that's called municipal elections. We run on platforms, we make our positions clear, and we move forward.
Ms. Triepke.
So part of representing the constituents is listening to them and having their input. I do agree with John in that not every decision needs to be taken to the voters, and that we are hired to do a job. However, when your taxes are significantly impacted and there's a decision that's being made that is going to severely impact those taxes, I think there's a minimum dollar amount. I don't know what that is. It could be if it's $1 million, $2 million, et cetera. But at a certain level, I think we need to be reaching out to the constituents to see what their viewpoint is on significant projects like that. Regarding Mountain Water, I think we were told at one point the expenses for the attorney fees were going to be a reasonable amount, and then everything exponentially increased. And I think at that point, if it's a contentious decision, then probably that should have gone to the voters to see. I think the bridge over Reserve Street is another example of something that people probably wouldn't have decided to fund their money in, especially when there's a school right down the street that a bridge like that would help. The Linda Vista striping is one that comes to mind too. That is an easy way. It doesn't need to necessarily go to a vote, but you can gather with the community and the constituents and listen to their viewpoints rather than moving forward with the project, then listening, and then undoing the project. I think there's wasted resources in that process, and I think if we were to listen to people ahead of time, we would have made a different decision.
Mary, do you want to respond at all to that?
Well, if we were to have a referendum, for example, on every $1 million decision that the Missoula City Council makes, we'd have an election every other week, and each one of those elections costs about 80 grand. So it would be an expensive and cumbersome process to make decisions. With regard in particular to the bridge that crosses Reserve Street, the fact of the matter is that no one's taxes have increased as a function of that bridge being constructed. The redevelopment agency vetted that project through its board and then through the city council, and there was an extensive design process. So there's lots of opportunity to receive public comment and input as we proceed on many of these projects. And remember, every Monday night, believe it or not, we're listening to you. And we tend to show up and hear what you have to say, and I still have some capacity to change my mind.
Ms. Triepke, do you want to respond before we go on?
Well, I think that in regards to the city council meetings, we did a tally for the number of votes taken since January 1st this year, and out of 3,250 votes, only 20 were a no vote. So I think some of the decisions are made before you go into the meetings, and that's 0.6% that people are willing, in city council, are willing to stand up and vote against. And I think that we need to be open to listening to constituents at the meetings and possibly prior. And I've seen different times where there's a 3-minute time limit, and sometimes people are given 5, sometimes people are cut off at 3. And I just think we need to be cognizant of people that are showing up to actually voice their opinion and be able to explain what their needs are.
Mayor Engen, should Missoula ever consolidate its government, or is the current separate city-county system best?
You know, this is a question that's actually brought to voters fairly frequently. By my standards, every 10 years, we have an opportunity as citizens to look at our form of government and change it. And at least once during my experience in public service, voters approved a local government study commission for both the city and the county. Those government study commissions spend a lot of time hearing from a lot of folks about our form of government and how we might alter that form of government, change or proceed based on what we've been doing. The last local government study commission made a couple of recommendations to voters. One was reducing the size of the city council, and much to my chagrin at the time, the size of the city council wasn't reduced. I'm sorry, city council members, I actually love you, but we have kind of the biggest city council in the state, and 12 folks, it turns out, have lots of opinions. So that opportunity presents itself to voters, and there is one consolidated government in the Class A municipality in the state, and that's Butte-Silverbow. I think they've had some success there. What we've heard from voters is they don't have a great deal of interest in consolidating city-county operations.
But do you think that would be best?
No. Sorry, I buried the lead.
So Missoula County is so big that to consolidate both the services, I agree, it's probably not the best idea. However, one of the things that we keep hearing on the campaign trail this go-round is there's a lot of people in Missoula County, right outside of Missoula. The city of Missoula is checkerboarded throughout, but there's quite a few people in Missoula County, right outside the limits, that have businesses or pay taxes to the city because of businesses that they're interested in, and they don't have a voice in this race. And I think that in terms of that, that's the biggest feeling out there, is that's the way that they want to affect how their taxes are being spent. I have friends that own a business out on North Reserve, and their taxes went up $13,000 this year, and they have no way to provide input in this race. And so I think that if we could, I think that that's kind of the wish of one of the county people out there, is to be able to figure out that solution. And then the other one is annexation. Nobody's really sure when people on the outskirts of town are going to be annexed into the county or into the city from the county, et cetera. And so some of those might be issues we could address.
So the actual consolidation proposed?
Right.
If you're elected, what do you expect 4 years from now your administration will be bragging about, and how did you achieve it? Ms. Triepke.
I don't think we'll be bragging, but I think that one of our main goals is to eliminate waste and try to find areas that we can condense so that we can find a way to either maintain or reduce property taxes to give back to you guys so that we are not constantly raising the taxes. I think that's so important because we want people to be able to afford to stay here. I have 4 kids and they're doing things the right way and they want to come back here and raise their kids. And right now the way and trajectory we're going, when we've been told taxes will be raised every year, that's not going to be a possibility for them. And I want this to be a place that our kids can raise their families in a safe and financially solid community and be able to stay here.
Mayor Engen.
I am grateful for not having a crystal ball, because there's stuff I don't want to know. I will, however, tell you that at the end of 4 years, I think that we will have worked cooperatively to provide more and better housing opportunities for the larger community. What I've learned from serving as mayor is that when we plan and when we're intentional, we actually accomplish our goals. And to date, we've had pretty good luck in accomplishing the goals that we set out when we've campaigned for this office. And that is a function of working together and, again, applying policy, resources, intelligence, and planning to those efforts. So I think we'll be in much better shape with regard to housing at the end of 4 years. I also believe that that as a function of planning, as a function of the private sector having confidence in the city of Missoula as a whole, that we're seeing record investment in the community. That record investment has significant rewards for the citizens of Missoula. And so this year, for the first time since the recession, we've seen an increase in tax base. That increase in tax base allowed us to actually reduce the municipal share of taxes this year. We actually reduced taxes this year. I didn't predict it. Again, no crystal ball. But what we do know, based on our experience this year, is that in the foreseeable future, we'll be able to meet community needs with existing revenues, and we hope that that continues.
Are you promising not to raise taxes?
That's a promise I can't make, because I have to responsibly serve this community. And when the lion's share of what we invest in our municipal tax dollar goes to folks who are on the street, making sure that citizens are safe and sound, I will not sacrifice citizen safety for a soundbite.
And Ms. Triepke, are you promising not to raise taxes?
I don't think any of us can promise that. I think it's my goal to help reduce it, but I've been pretty clear on not making any promises through this race, because I don't think that that's a reliable way to run a race and then have it come back on you.
I'd like to turn it over to the candidates now to each ask each other a question, and that will be the last question that we'll have. Ms. Triepke, do you have a question for Mayor Engen?
Okay, so you had a guest column in the Missoulian a couple of weeks ago that said the idea that we're somehow taxing folks out of their homes is a myth. And I had an elderly citizen on fixed income approach me last week at a fundraiser and said that she had asked you about that she was facing the bleak reality she would have to sell her house she'd lived in for years. She indicated there wasn't an answer for her, and you continue to tout your successful programs. Property taxes and special assessments have gone up drastically since 2010. Special road district assessments have gone up 700% since then. Special parks have increased 800%. Yet our roads and parks are not regularly maintained. My question for you is, what do you tell people face to face, both fixed income and other citizens in the city of Missoula, why taxes have gone up in some cases 30% or more since you've taken office, and they're now being forced to sell their homes or move?
So I tell folks pretty consistently that my responsibility here is to provide services, and those services come at a cost, and those costs have a much deeper impact on some folks than on others. However, if you are in a position of being taxed out of your home, we actually do have a program through the state of Montana that allows for us to help abate those taxes, so that that is not the circumstance you're in. I actually don't recall the conversation with the person you're mentioning, but I hope that I was compassionate and thoughtful and realistic. We're not in the business of taxing folks out of their homes, but we are in the business of making sure that we have enough money in the bank and we pay enough people so that when that person who is otherwise likely vulnerable calls 911, we have a first responder to show up and make sure that that person's life and limb are protected. If I had my druthers, we would have all the money we had to do everything we could, and everyone would be on an equal footing. That's not the way our system works. So we have to make difficult decisions, and I'll continue to make those difficult decisions. I'll also pay attention to the values of the community, and a lot of those tax increases are really the function of folks being willing to tax themselves to make this place better. And when we ask folks whether they are willing to do that, whether they're willing to invest in the quality of this community by taxing themselves, The answer has been yes and yes and yes. We always try to find a balance, and when someone is in dire straits, believe me, they come to my office, we'll find a way to fix it.
Mayor Engen, you have a question for Ms. Triepke?
Gosh, I probably have a lot of questions. One is, as Chief Executive of the City of Missoula, as you suggested, you're in the position of being responsible to folks who don't necessarily agree with you. And despite that vote tally, it turns out the Missoula City Council sometimes doesn't agree with what I have to say. How do you work with folks of different political persuasion to move forward?
So I think one of the things I bring to the table is surrounding myself with good quality people, and the city council is elected, so those are people that we are forced and privileged to work with. Both in the same, no, I'm saying forced because it's by the vote, but privileged too, because we're all civic minded and we all want to bring the best to the table to work with them. I have friends currently sitting on city council who I've served on boards with, and we've been super successful together. And I have people that are currently running that I've had the same experience with, and we've never talked politics up until now. I know that they sit a little bit differently than I do in the political arena, but I'm not afraid of working with people and listening, because I think if we bring to the table the issues and we talk about them in an educated manner and listen to both sides, I think that's the best scenario. I don't come to this thinking I have all the answers. I want to hear things outside of the box and from different perspectives, because then it allows us, we might not have the right answers coming into the room, but we might come up with a different solution after listening to everybody. I'm not afraid of working with different people with different political views. I think that's why it's a nonpartisan race, and it's our privilege and our responsibility to work with everybody.
And on that note, that concludes this part of today's program. I want to thank our candidates for running and for being present here today.
Thank you very much. We're now going to move into the tabletop phase. For those who may not have been here in the past, we're going to, for the next 10 minutes, each table is going to discuss today's program. First of all, I want everyone at the table to introduce yourselves, because you may be sitting next to someone you don't know, and that's one of the beauties of the City Club forums. You get a meet.
Chip, could everyone just stand up and introduce themselves to us?
Yeah, start off with yourself. And then if you'll introduce yourselves and then discuss today's program, and then each table will come up with one question. And then you'll select one person at the table to stand up and ask that question. Because we have so many people here today and only so many minutes, we're going to ask that those questions be very brief. We don't want speeches. We don't want 3-minute questions. So create a question that you can ask in 30 seconds or less, okay? Larry Brand will then go around. He will hand the microphone to each table, and then that person can stand up. And so now, for the next 10 minutes, please go to the table. All right, we'd like to start the tabletop round question now. Larry Brand is at the far end of the auditorium. Testing. Here we go. And again, we have a lot of people here, so we need to move this very, very quickly. So Larry's going to start, and so each table down at that end, raise your hand, he'll come to you. Again, very quick question.
Nancy Picard, how do we attract more high-paying jobs to Missoula, which will help disperse the tax burden?
Ms. Triepke.
So I think that there's two things. We need to simplify the process for businesses trying to come into town, and we need to take an approach where we target certain industry businesses that we think have quality compensation and make those businesses feel at home and welcome when they come through the process. One of the things I've seen or heard a lot on the trail is that people trying to start a business in Missoula come in and get a different set of answers depending on who they talk to at the counter where they come in to apply. And I think that there needs to be a clear, concise, streamlined simplified process for this, so that once you hand in your information, you know you've done everything you need to do, rather than being sent back to the table to comply with other regulations that aren't visible. I think that once we can target the businesses that can provide quality compensation and actually allow them to find housing that's affordable for their employees, that we can make a big difference. I know the Montana State University works closely with the city of Bozeman to kind of go through those processes, and the university is able to work with local business leaders to cross-promote the students with the businesses, so that then they have students that are staying in town in Bozeman to stay and work and raise their families instead of leaving town. And I think that right now we've got an issue with students leaving Missoula after they graduate.
So we've done a number of things over the years, not the least of which is establish public-private partnership. We call the Missoula Economic Partnership. That organization is directed by a board, most of whom are leaders in the private sector, and we work with the community to develop an economic development plan and a strategy. So if you're an employer who pays more than $15 an hour, we will work with you through the partnership to, if there is red tape, we endeavor to cut through that. But moreover, what we do is try to make connections and provide resources in addition to whatever you may bring to the table. So last week I had a conversation with a local company that hopes to have 500 employees within the next decade, and they want to do that in downtown Missoula. So we spent about an hour looking at opportunities, both in terms of real estate and in terms of what the city can bring to the table through investment to make that a reality. When you look at the lists, which are frequent about entrepreneurial activity, best places to start a business, we are routinely in the top 10 on those lists for a community our size. And again, that's because we work together and because we're very open and connected. We have these conversations daily about building business, growing jobs, and working cooperatively with partners both in education, unions, and the private sector to put all of those pieces together. More people working in Missoula today than have ever worked in Missoula, Montana.
Good afternoon, TJ McDermott. Quick question. The Missoula City County Jail Diversion Plan was adopted both by the city and the county, and it identified some areas in our community where we did not have resources, specifically for a 24-hour mental health crisis facility, as well as the need to expand substance abuse and mental health services, as well as pretrial. And curious what your commitment is as city leader to invest in those alternatives to incarceration.
Thank you, Sheriff, for the question. So the Missoula City Council, working in cooperation with Task Force and Missoula County, produced and ratified the jail diversion master plan. We're now all about implementation. The implementation is expensive. The fact of the matter is, however, that incarceration is more expensive, and one of the things that we found on the ground is that we don't provide opportunities for our first responders to take folks who are in crisis to the right place. Today we have two options. One is, well, actually we have three options. We leave them on the street, which isn't palatable. The other is we take them to the emergency room where the tally grows pretty quickly, or we take them to jail. These folks don't belong in either of those places, nor do they belong on the street. So as part of that, through our Office of Housing, we're working on chasing down a community model that's been successful in other communities, including Salt Lake City and Spokane, and that's the Housing First model. We get people surrounded by care where a couple of things can happen. One is they begin a road to recovery. They find that they get the services and treatment they need to return to a full life in our community. Or if they can't get fixed, they die in dignity rather than on the street. Either way, it costs the community considerably less than jailing them or taking them to the ER.
So I know a lot of work was put into that plan, and it was meaningful. I think one of the things that struck me was we have a plan to put in place and we don't have the money to fund it to implement it. And when I look at some of the things that, it seems like we're study heavy in Missoula, We put money into studies on roads, traffics, et cetera. And I know that we need to do that, but it seems like every time we turn around, there's another study being placed. And I think that we've overspent our money in terms of those studies, in terms of buying private companies. If we took that money and that we're putting in those two areas, we could come up with some of the funds needed to implement that program. I look at and I know these are all kind of topics that everybody talks about, but we're roundabout heavy. If we could somehow find some of the ways that we could pull the extraneous money out, we could fund the meaningful programs like that need to be put into place. I know right now that I've talked to some of the policemen in the city, and they're not feeling like they have a sense of clear direction on what to do in these situations. And I think being able to implement a plan like that is paramount, and my support's behind it.
Malcolm Lowe. My question is about the MRA. The redevelopment agency spends a lot of money in this community and also has the potential to impact our tax revenues. What role do you see the mayor's office playing in guiding and leading that agency?
Ms. Triepke.
You know, the interesting thing I've learned about the MRA in this process, and there's been a lot of things I've learned on the trail, so it's been an eye-opening experience. But the MRA is appointed solely by the mayor, and I think that as some of the the urban renewal district and the tax increment funding sunsets, then those funds are what are utilized to pay for the running of MRA and the staffing. And I think that if they're appointed by the mayor and then projects they're not taken to the voters, they're pushed through, I think that there's somewhat of a sense of lack of objectivity. And I think that we need to somehow be able to include the public in some of the decisions they make. I think they do a great job, and they have done some phenomenal projects in Missoula, but I don't think everything's as transparent as it could be.
So I do appoint the MRA board. It's 5 members, and I will tell you that on the day they sign their oath, they completely forget that I appointed them and go completely rogue. My ability to influence that board is unfortunately negligible. No, actually, we have a good relationship and good conversations, but they're very independent and they're very thoughtful stewards of tax money. So the redevelopment agency is but for money. The redevelopment agency uses tax increment, which is sometimes a little complicated to understand, takes a little while to figure out the math, but the short version is that the increment that's created from new growth in tax increment districts gets reinvested in those districts. And so in the case of a district that has expired, that is the first urban renewal district in downtown Missoula, about $20 million of investment leveraged about $200 million of product on the ground. That goes directly into tax base, and when that district expired, our general fund tax base increased appropriately. I would argue that much of what gets done with redevelopment agency money makes products either happen or makes them bigger and better. An example I often use is what was Kmart when I was a kid. That was an empty parking lot and building for a long time. We worked with the developer through the redevelopment agency to not only help assist with the infrastructure necessary to create a new shopping center there, but that shopping center is bigger than the developer originally planned. And today, where no one was working before, about 200 folks work, and that will all go to our tax base when that district expires.
Hi, I'm Nicole Mitchell. So there's a few other cities in Montana that implement a citywide tax, like Whitefish or West Yellowstone. Would either of you ever consider implementing a citywide sales or tourism tax, or maybe a seasonal citywide sales or tourism tax?
I have advocated for the opportunity to ask citizens that very question. So the way local option taxes work in resort communities in Montana is that if you are a community of 5,000 or fewer souls and you can demonstrate that a certain amount of your economic activity is generated by tourism, you get to put it to the voters whether or not there should be a limited sales tax local on a limited number of products, most often those associated with tourism. So bed nights in a hotel, liquor by the glass, restaurant meals, etc. In the communities where those local option taxes have been deployed, you see infrastructure that's in really good shape, and you also see property tax relief in the form of what's in effect a rebate. So City Whitefish, for example, property taxpayers get money back at the end of the day by virtue of the fact that they're capturing the millions of people who visit their community. I would like the opportunity to at least talk to voters about whether they'd be interested in seeing that opportunity for our community. Today we can't do it.
So we disagree on a lot of things, but I think the information that John just presented to you is correct. I used to be the director of the Convention and Visitors Bureau and dealt with bed tax on a level every day, and the fact is that right now we can't implement it at this point.
But you would favor it, vote on it?
I'd definitely be interested in looking at it.
Lindsay Wallace, what is your position on the role and responsibility of government to provide social services and public assistance?
Thanks. So actually, I think the government's role is, so the government's role or the role of the city of Missoula is to provide services to Missoula. Right now our taxes are going up, the services we're depending on, the regular services are going down. Regarding public assistance, I actually, and this is a little bit of a personal story, I actually applied for public assistance right when I was in the process of getting a divorce, and it was a stopgap measure, not knowing when the divorce would be finalized and over, and I had 4 kids in a rental house that I had some months paid for ahead of time. But I needed to know that I could not only pay the rent and have that covered, but also be able to know that my house was warm, I had food on the table, roof over the head for my kids, and clothes to put on them. I am much more fortunate than other people in my position because my ex-husband and I had worked hard to provide well and get ahead. And so in the end it was fine, but those several months of indecisiveness and not knowing what was going to happen provided the opportunity for me to rely on a stopgap measure that was able to, for my kids not to be able to have to worry about different scenarios. So I'm fully supportive of public assistance, and I was able to thankfully use it in a short-term manner the way that it was intended, and I hope that it works for the people out there that need it as well.
So fundamentally, I believe that we have an obligation to our citizens to ensure that they live in a safe, healthy place, and that the fundamentals of existence are available to them. We've done a lot of that work in cooperation with the private sector and nonprofit groups, including the Missoula Food Bank, the Missoula Housing Authority, and the Paparello Center. Fundamentally, we are experiencing a time in Washington, D.C. where federal dollars to support those most vulnerable communities are under fire or going away, and ultimately the responsibility will fall to us unless something changes to do our best to close the gap. That is enormously challenging, but it's also responsible and I think morally necessary. There are tremendous costs to be paid when people suffer in our communities, and unless we work together to address those problems that sometimes seem intractable, we won't get there. We can't do enough to take care of our citizens. We have to do it within our means, we have to be creative, and we have to create partnerships. But fundamentally, if the least among us is suffering, we're all suffering.
Hello, my name is Molly Davidson. Our table really focused on homelessness in the community and the perceptions of how that affects not only our community, but the people who are in that situation. And we acknowledge that there's a plan in place to reduce homelessness. So what is your impression of the progress that's been made to reduce homelessness in our community? And what steps will you take to ensure that that progress is made in the future?
So our 10-year plan to end the homelessness is the product of a community process where we looked at barriers to housing. How do we get people in the places they need to get? And we recognized a number of those barriers and have processes in place to help. So for the first time, We do have a single point of entry for folks who are homeless, and we saw that as one of the barriers to folks finding stable housing. They didn't know where to go. They got run around a bit, and ultimately some of them gave up. So working with our partners at United Way, and now we've moved the coordinator for the 10-year plan into our Office of Housing, we're going to continue to march down that path. Fundamentally, I think we begin with this notion of housing first, figuring out ways to stabilize people in homes so that they don't have to worry about that fundamental piece of business every day. It's really hard to make a good decision in your life if you don't know where the hell you're going to sleep. I'm confident that the plan is a function of staff and community interest in implementation will get us where we need to go. It's slow. I wish we were moving more quickly, but I think we called it a 10-year plan for a reason. We recognize that it's not a snap of the finger problem, nor their snap of the finger solution.
Ms. Tripp.
So I think the plan is called the 10-year plan to end homelessness, and in all reality, I love that we have a plan to do that, but in all reality, I don't think homelessness is ever going to be ended. I think it's still going to be out there. We can make a huge dent and effort in the process of it. Regarding the plan specifically, it's a 10-year plan. We sat down with, some members of our team sat down with the folks at United Way, and they've made huge strides. The people at the Poverello Center, the coordinator for the plan, and the point of entry program that John talked about. It's fascinating to listen to and really delve into and see the work that they're doing. My concern is that it's a 10-year plan and we're 2 years into it and we're just starting to implement it, so we're a fifth of the way through it. One of the things I noted in that meeting, there's other groups in town that are working on their own to work on the homeless issue. There's Interfaith Collaborative, which comprises several different groups within itself, some other faith-based groups. There's people out there that are trying to make their dent, and one of the things I noticed in the meeting is there was an acknowledged lack of communication between these groups. So if everybody was working together, because it's a really important issue, and if everybody was working together to make the progress jointly, instead of one person having a 10-year plan and different groups having other plans, we could really make some progress in the effect of the homelessness. I think that there are several groups out there. There's people that are truly down on their luck and can utilize extra assistance from us. I think there's a mental health capacity that we need to find ways and avenues for them to get some help. And then there's people that really do want to be on the street, and that's not a popular opinion, but that's the fact. We've got a seasonal problem in Missoula, more in the summertime in the nice months than in the winter, but the fact is we have to reach out compassionately and try to help them all have a safe environment to be housed in. The other thing I want to say is that in addition to the homeless people, there is a whole other contingent of people who are living on the edge. And those are people that are not homeless, but they're striving every month to have a roof over their heads, food, clothing for their kids. And I think we need to be just as worried about those who are out there working and struggling to not fall into that other zone.
Hi, Kelsey Stam Jimenez with the Mansfield Center. The University of Montana has been at the heart of our vibrant community for a long time. And given both its status as a major employer in the city and also as a feeder of young professionals. Given the challenges UM has faced the last few years and also the opportunity to work with the new administration, how do you envision working with UM to make sure it remains a strong institution?
Ms. Triepke. So I referred to Bozeman with the housing issue a little ways back in the forum, but what they've done with the entrance of a new president and the leadership and the dynamic cooperation and relationship that they've built with the city and the university is phenomenal. When you go to Bozeman and drive in, you can feel it electrically in the city. And I think that we need to, I think we have a huge opportunity here with a mayor, new or coming in, new or incumbent, honestly, but reaching out and working and forming strong partnerships with the new president. I was able to attend 3 of the 4 interviews for the presidential candidates, and unfortunately Seth Bodners was the one I wasn't able to go to due to other scheduling conflicts, but he seems so dynamic, ready to go, hit the ground running, and work with different groups in town to make sure the university is
moving forward in a thoughtful manner. I think we need to keep mindful of the research that comes out of our university and try to find local organizations that pair up with the students coming out, trying to keep them in town, get them jobs, and really just watching out for the relationship that we have in place and the potential that we can bring it back.
So I had the good fortune to sit on the search committee for the new president, and it was fascinating. And in the end, I believe that the Regents have hired a dynamic leader who can make a tremendous difference. But that leader can't do it alone, which is why we've worked with the University of Montana over the course of my tenure as mayor, and we've done so, I think, pretty effectively on issues as complex as sexual assault, to issues as hopeful as bringing students across Arthur Street and the river to fully participate in our campus. I think we have a lot of opportunity to do joint planning. Modern campuses don't have the geographic borders that have been traditionally established. Modern campuses actually move beyond those borders to plug themselves into the larger community, and my hope is that we're working with Seth and his team, we can begin to engage in planning around innovation centers, which is some of the work that's been done in many other communities around the country, and around the world for that matter, and really rely on the talent and resources of students, faculty, and staff working in and among community members to make the place better. I often say that the University of Montana and the City of Missoula are inextricable. We're in this together, and I've got high hopes for the future based on my experience in the past.
Jana Staten, back to housing. Our table would like to know if either of you would consider the city getting involved with more land trusts to make land more affordable so that we could build more affordable housing.
So land trusts are a great tool. For those of you who may not be familiar, land trusts provide for a limited equity ownership model, which means that the cost of land, which is frankly the most significant cost in terms of building housing in Missoula, Montana today, is tempered by the fact that that some of the equity goes back into that trust and is shared, and so home buyers, while seeing some equity, they don't see the dramatic increase that an open market purchase would allow. Land trusts work, we've done them on a relatively small scale in Missoula, but they're certainly one of the tools in the toolbox that we'll be considering as we work on housing policy. Land is a big deal, and as I believe a realtor once said, they ain't making more of it.
So I'm a fan of land trust. I spent one of my early nonprofit positions in Missoula was as the director of development for Five Valleys Land Trust, and we know what a great asset that's been to the community, and we look around and see the successes that they've built. As far as working with the housing, I think that's evident in the project I referred to with Bozeman earlier. If we can partner with different groups or organizations in any effort to make more affordable housing, I think it's a no-brainer to consider it.
Hi, Kia Lizak. We have several arts leaders at our table from various places around the world, and our question is, how do the arts contribute value to the Missoula community, and what can the city do to support the arts and artists?
So interesting. I just graduated from Leadership Missoula last year, and so we're in the, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the program, but on year 2, you get together and put on the different days for the city. So I'm on the Arts Day for this season for Leadership Missoula, and it's actually fascinating because different people come to the different table, or different people come to the table with what their idea of art is, and I think that's the true definition is art comes in so many forms, and I would guarantee there's a number of artists in this room who are completely passionate about what they do in Missoula, and I think it's one of the groups that probably sacrifices a little bit because they don't get as much notice or necessarily funding as other groups in Missoula. But interestingly enough, as we sat to put the day together for Leadership Missoula, we ran out of time for the different groups we wanted to bring in. I just participated in Tell Us Something with Mark Moss, and had just started going to that a few months ago in Missoula, and it is one of the best kept secrets in Missoula. You get storytellers who stand up on stage and tell a story about their own experiences. And when I got to talking to Mark more about it, he's in the schools promoting this program and working with students of all ages to get them interested in his version of art. And I think that's what the key about the artist community is in Missoula. Everybody has their own take, or not entry level, but their own take on it, so that everybody's perception is different about what art means. And so I totally support them, and I'm looking forward to seeing everything that's out there instead of just my slice of the pie.
Yes, so Kia, I'm opposed to arts. I don't get them. No, so the city of Missoula has been fortunate in that we recognize the value of arts not only for feeding the soul, but also feeding community coffers, and a number of surveys have suggested that arts are a multi-million-dollar industry in the city of Missoula, and we support them a number of ways, not the least of which is through Arts Missoula, our cultural and arts arm. We also had the opportunity to partner with folks in the private sector in Missoula County Public Schools on an Arts for All program through the Kennedy Center, and that program has brought together partners who are spending time in schools and really making a difference in the arts experience for young people, getting them a chance to participate in art from a very early age and understand what it means not only to themselves, but what it means to the larger community. We've had a number of conversations with the Economic Partnership about how we continue to brand Missoula as an arts community in addition to the many other things that we have to offer. And my quick example of the way arts can influence the nature of a community is over the course of the last 5 years, with lots of community support and vision, Nick and Robin Shakota took the top hat, which used to have the worst bathrooms in the nation, and turned it into a world-class performing venue. They also did the same with the historic Wilma Theater, and now with the amphitheater. And Missoula is on the map as a music community as well as an arts community, and that's all good for all of us.
Are we going to take one more question? It's about 1 o'clock. I'm looking at the, oh.
Now you can hear me. There's a lot of questions to go through, and so anyone, normally we stop at 1 o'clock, and if people have to leave, please feel free to get up and leave. But we're going to go on for probably another 15, 20 minutes to get through the questions here. So again, if you have to leave, please stand up, but those people that have questions, go right ahead and keep on asking.
And we have one more.
And before you leave, let me just let you know that our next program is in, let's see here, will be next month will be Beverly Edmonds on the 13th. She is the University of Montana Provost and head of all academic departments at the university. And again, please go to cityclubmissoula.com and sign up so we know that you're coming. And please come to that program next month. Now go ahead with your question.
My name is Bill Lawrence. The question from our table is, what new devices or programs would you like to see in order to bring more affordable housing to Missoula?
Very good.
So we have been largely reactionary when it comes to affordable housing. We have great partners in the community who build housing all day long. But we have largely simply been responsive to projects that they bring to us, and I think we can be deliberate and once again intentional about that, and actually understand what the need is in the community, and then do a request for proposals where we actually ask for what we want, where we want it, and how we want it, and we find partners to invest in to build that housing. That intentionality largely goes missing today, and that's a tool that I think can make a tremendous amount of difference.
I think there's two main things we need to do to address the affordable housing, and like I mentioned before, it's not just the low income, it's across the board, but we need to simplify the process, not complicate it, the red tape stories I hear are horrific. I've talked to some developers who have sent their proposals in, gotten them back with all the requirements that are presented to them. They get handed back the packet 2, 3, and 4 more times, adding up to, in one case, $60,000 to the process before the ground's even broken. At that point, you end up not making affordable housing affordable anymore. The other one is to work with the developers and construction industry, possibly to reduce some of the impact fees so that they can not only avoid the red tape and delays in the process, but also make it so that they don't have to pass on additional unexpected fees onto the people that are trying to buy the houses.
My name is Jesse Ramos. I'm actually running for City Council here in Ward 4, and one of the most surprising things that I heard during the whole campaign season was when Mayor Engen passionately disavowed the idea of the city being run like a business. And I just want some more clarification on that, because the city is, as we know, taking over more and more private businesses, and there are some areas of the city that should not be run like a business, such as mental health and the arts, but why not adopt some of the business practices that, in the case of Mountain Water, the rates most likely...
What is your question?
Okay, so what are your thoughts on the city being run like a business, and why is it such a bad thing if it is run like a business?
The city of Missoula should not run like a business, can't run like a business, because that's not the way government works. That doesn't mean we can't take principles of business and apply them appropriately. There are certainly management techniques, accounting techniques, all of which we employ today. But fundamentally, a business is about individuals for private gain making market-based decisions. The day I begin to run the city of Missoula like a business is the day that riots ensue on the streets. We talk about transparency a lot in this campaign. Business is by its very nature not transparent, and doesn't have to be. The fact of the matter is that we engage in lengthy processes that allow us to garner as much opinion and approval as possible and move forward in a thoughtful and what we believe is a way that represents the broad values of the community. As a small business person, I can tell you my experience was that business is challenging, but very much different from local government.
Ms. Triepke. So, in regarding the transparency, I think that let me go back to the running like a business. We differ on this completely. I absolutely think the city should be run like a business. We should be working with what we have, not expecting the taxpayers to come up with what we don't have with no numbers attached. I think in the real world, you come in with projects on time, on budget, or there's repercussions. The transparency issue, I think we can have both. We can run a city as a business and with transparency, and that's setting a cultural tone from the top down. I think that if we are able to do that, and set that as a requirement for the day-to-day business, I think everybody follows through. I think my question, or my struggle with the question on this is, if we don't want to run it as a business, then why are we acquiring private businesses and trying to run them? That's the one part I struggle with and can't come up with an answer to.
Chuck Leonard, you both appear to be pro-growth candidates, so our table unanimously would like to know if you could provide us with some specifics how you plan to manage this growth so that we maintain our sense of place.
Ms. Triepke. You know, Missoula honestly is at the point of going from a town that we know and love to exploding, and I think that I don't have all the answers, and I'll tell you that. I think that we need to have a team in place that can look at all of the issues, whether it's all the issues we've talked about today, the businesses coming in with high-paying jobs that can provide, and then being able to provide them with affordable housing. We need to make sure our citizens are safe with the police and fire departments, and right now, our police, I don't think, are staffed appropriately enough to cover the city we do have. In talking to them, I've heard that at many times there's only 5 patrol cars on the streets for our entire city. There's no way we can keep up with that. So we need to be thoughtful in how we're, again, going back to running it like a business, we need to be thoughtful about where we're placing our money and how to provide the services as the growth comes in.
So over the last decade or so, Missoula's grown at about 1.5% a year. This year, maybe 2.5%, which is not explosive growth. The fact is, it's really manageable, and one of the reasons it's manageable is because the community has made clear its values, and those values are manifest in our plans and policies, ranging from a zoning code that we revamped to reflect the nature of what's happening on the ground, to our growth policy, which calls for us to use existing infrastructure and create density where it's appropriate, so that we're not building on hillsides or in open spaces or on ag land. In my opinion, our growth today is healthy, and those planning documents, whether it's the long-range transportation plan, the downtown master plan, our non-motorized transportation plan, and the list goes on, those documents all point to growing a community that still preserves a sense of place, because again, that's a very clear community value.
Hello, I'm Connie Keogh, and at our table we had representatives from the Missoula Housing Authority and some lenders. I think some of them are still here. So our conversation was more about housing. And it came up that when we acquired Mountain Water, that there was some land that came with that acquisition. Is there any possibility that that land can be utilized somehow for affordable housing? Could you discuss that, please?
Great question. We actually did get some real estate as a function of the Mountain Water acquisition, and that's not the only real estate that the city of Missoula has that today is underused. And so we budgeted this year for an analysis of our real estate inventory, so we can understand how municipal operations grow, and also how we might better put land that's on the books to use. The real estate associated with Mountain Water, there could be some potential there. There's potential for some surplus properties around the community, and we will absolutely look at those pieces of dirt as appropriate.
I would just agree that we need to look at all real estate inventory and consider all of it for affordable housing, because it's in such short demand, and we are geographically limited with the city limits of how far we can go out. So I think any and all opportunities should be examined.
Hello, I'm Linda Shook, a new resident, new voter. Our table is almost empty, but we did discuss taxes and had a question about the resort and lodging tax. Since that's been addressed, could you tell me if it would be possible to do an employment tax so that if you work in the city, make a certain level of income, you would pay a tax as a way to bring in more revenue?
You know, I'd have to look into that more because I don't know the specifics of that. One of the things that I mentioned before that we've talked to is the frustration of people who live in the county but pay taxes for their businesses and don't have a right to vote. And so I think that there's to vote in the city, sorry. But I think there's things that we need to take a look at across the board, and I could definitely look into that.
So other communities have used that. Those communities are typically serving bedroom communities in larger urban areas. I suspect that the political will to get that done in Missoula, Montana may be lacking today. I could be wrong about that. So it's really not on our radar.
Hello, Heidi Wallace. As the city that passed the first non-discrimination ordinance protecting LGBTQ citizens in Montana, I would like to know, where do you stand on the proposed ballot initiative I-183, which would force people to use the bathroom that aligns with their assigned gender on their original birth certificate, impacting our transgender and gender diverse citizens?
Mary. The City of Missoula is a plaintiff in a lawsuit with the American Civil Liberties Union opposing that initiative for a variety of reasons, not the least of which it would be incredibly expensive to cities and towns. And it's also stupid and humiliating.
I think that citizens, no matter what their, I think all citizens need to be feel safe and protected and have the same access to all services that everybody else has.
What do you think of the initiative, though? I-183.
Yeah, I think it's, I agree.
Hi, Hatton Littman from Missoula County Public Schools. We've heard a lot in the room, and our table specifically addressed issues around growth, transportation, where to put housing, where to find affordable housing. I'm really curious from each of you, and our table is too, if there are specific communities that are facing that 100,000 resident threshold that you look to as models for how we might be able to replicate their successes or be concerned about their failures.
You asked about the communities, right?
Sure, model communities that we can look to.
Right, and I think that, honestly, I keep going back to kind of what Bozeman has just done with, you know, there's laughter, et cetera, but I think that they have figured out a way to keep people in their communities and find some housing for them. There's other affordable communities nationwide too, but these guys are in our backyard and within the state limitations and the regulations we have in place, they've figured out a way to come up with solutions to provide the housing and work with what they have, and I think that we can talk to many different communities, but I think going and talking to them and seeing their successes is a place to start.
And I absolutely agree that some of the best ideas are stolen, which is why Erin, who is sitting at your table, is charged with thievery. Her job is to look at these best practices around not only the state, but around the country to see what we can do and do better. I will tell you that I will not hold up Bozeman as a paragon of housing affordability. The fact of the matter is that Bozeman has largely driven new home buyers out to Belgrade, and that creates all sorts of additional issues. So I think there are better communities to look at, and I know that Erin's on the case.
I think I've hit all the tables. Have I missed a table?
Let's go again.
One more time.
I'd like to thank everyone for coming today. I'd like to thank the candidates. Thank you very much for taking this time. Again, thank you as always. Please remember our next program on Monday, November 13th. University of Montana Provost Beverly Evans. Please come to our next program. We look forward to seeing you.